I'm Marilia, and I want to welcome you to El Salto del Gato's Gumshoe playlist series. The crime I am working on is the Murdaugh Murders, and this is part 2. Let's go there, but first, let's do a quick review. There are some terminology that you should be familiar with in this narrative. When I refer to houses, this is a 360-degree circle that represents the zodiac. When I refer to houses, I'm referring to one of these pie-shaped sections because this chart, this circle, is divided into 12 equal 30-degree spaces that are pie-shaped, and each one of those is called a house. A house shows the location of where action is taking place. The action is represented by the influencers, which are the planets and luminaries. So they are the ones who are generating the type of action. Now, the signs along the wheel are the zodiac signs, and they're different than houses. They don't mean the exact same thing, although many people make that association. But the signs basically are just kind of letting us know who owns that particular property. So I'm going to refer to these as houses. So in the case of the first house, we have this sign that I know is the sign of Capricorn. That tells me that the owner of this property is the planet Saturn. Now you notice Saturn is not located in this house because the planets that own the different houses do not have to be in the houses. They're the ones who are telling the story that's taking place, and they're exerting their influences, and that's what's generating the story. They can generate those influences anywhere in the chart, and the relationships that they form is what we refer to as aspects. So when you hear me say they're having a bad aspected planet, or it's a well-aspected planet, what I'm saying is that the influences that they are generating or involved in are either good or bad. And all of that will mean something as we weave this entire picture. I think that pretty much is all that you need to know about that. Now, in my narrative, I have some little places where I will make a note of this is fact number 1 or fact number 2. Facts are basically things that have already come out in the trial as evidence. So we know that those are facts. When I in the narrative will say clue number 1 or clue number 2, what I'm referring to are my interpretations of what I am reading in the chart as possible outcomes. And there's another place where I call them upas, and what I am saying there is that's purely speculative. I don't have any facts to base that on, but it is something that I'm reading in the chart that's pointing to that as a possible occurrence. So that's it for now. Let's go there. The sign on the cusp as we enter the chart is right here, and this is just something I'm using as a placeholder. And because my nails are not looking very pretty, I'm going to use this as a marker, a pointer. So right here, this sign is Capricorn. Capricorn is sitting on this house cusp. I don't know if I mentioned that all these little lines are called cusp, and what they do is they divide the beginning and ending point of each house. So they're the boundaries of the house. So on this cusp, the sign that rules or owns that property will always be on the cusp. So as you notice, Saturn owns Capricorn, is on the sign of this cusp. I know, because I know the language of astrology, that the ruler or owner of Capricorn is the planet Saturn. Now, planets, each zodiac sign is assigned 1, sometimes 2 planets. And the reason for that is that originally in Renaissance astrology, they were only the classic planets. Then later, the modern planets were added. And I went through all that in my first video. You can refer to that. I'll link it below. But that just means that some houses will have a classic planet and a modern planet as its rulers, and both of them will exert their influences. So when we look at a house to see what's going on there, when we enter this, the first thing we look at is, okay, I'm in this particular house, and I know that when a crime event takes place, we always enter into the crime scene. So as soon as we come in here, we're looking at a crime scene. This particular house has this vibe to it because Capricorn just describes what that energy is that we're going to encounter, or every sign on each cusp describes the energy of that house. So right now, I know that as we enter here, we find Capricorn on the first cusp, and it exudes a cold, calculating, aloof, standoffish, unemotional, and uncomfortable vibe. I get the sense of a presence of power and control, a very tense, anxiety-driven figure of authority. This energy is disciplined, demanding, domineering, determined, pissed off, and focused. So here's the first fact that is known and that the chart confirms, is that the crime took place on the property of the father. How do I know that? Well, I know that Moselle, which in this chart I'm going to refer to different properties that are named. One of them is Moselle, which is a 1,700-acre hunting lodge and the location of where the crime took place. Another one is Edisto, which is a beach property that was also owned by the Murdaugh. And another one that I'm going to refer to here is the law firm, which was known as PMPED, Pimped, of all things. But they have since changed their name, and now they're known as the Parker Law Group. But just to make a reference of that. So here, the reason I know that this is the father's house is because Capricorn's ruler, Saturn, represents the father. And in general, the placement of Capricorn usually points to the father. But let me tell you a little story about this property. Moselle was technically deeded in Maggie's name at the time of her death, but it was Alec who originally acquired the property in one of his dealings. Now, Moselle is rumored to have a history of being owned by drug smugglers, and Alec acquired it in exchange for legal representation. Now, I have not verified this, so I will call it rumor and speculation. But it is said that perhaps there was more that goes along with the story about Alec's involvement with these nefarious characters. But like I said, that's all rumor. And until I have more substantial information that can be verified, I won't go there. But Capricorn, like I said, describes the father figure in a chart, and the house is the location of the crime, and the owner of that property, we'll call it Alec. Now, wherever Capricorn is found, that section of the chart is owned by Saturn. Now, in this chart, the first house belongs to Saturn. And this represents an experienced, older energy capable of compartmentalizing and calculated thinking. It's very comfortable dealing within a corporate setting and with contracts, law firms, lawyers, bankers, law enforcement, and politicians. In my opinion, this describes Alec perfectly. Saturn is the one in charge here, and you can bet that nothing happened here that he did not authorize. Now, is he home? Well, not at this home, but he is in another location that's associated with at least his family, and I would not be surprised if they all had interest in that property, and that's the Murdaugh law firm that I alluded to at the beginning, that was once known as Pimped, but is now the Parker Law Group. Now, I'm just reading that into this chart because he wasn't home. But he is in the second house. And this second house has this sign of Aquarius here. Now, I'm hoping that this can be seen. Aquarius. Now, Aquarius has this very kind of light and airy reputation of being friendly and philanthropic and for the good of all. But its co-rulers are Saturn and Uranus, and neither one of those exude an energy for the good of all. And we're going to go a little deeper into that. But for now, so that you know, Saturn is in here because it's got a little bit of ownership to this house, but it's also involving everything that Uranus represents, which is a group. And this group and Saturn are having a discussion. But we're going to come back to this because we're not done with the first house yet. So let's go back to the first house. That's the crime scene. And we didn't really go into the details of what we found there. In mythology, the archetype associated with the negative vibration of Saturn is Kronos. And Kronos is known as the one who eats his children, a metaphor for how death consumes us. He's known as the Grim Reaper, Father Time, and ultimately death. He is known as the maker and breaker of bones and spreader of manure in his associations with agriculture. You see, Kronos was punished by Jupiter, who represents the law, in the mythological story, and was exiled to Italy and placed in charge of agriculture. You know, the Greeks and the Italians. So here's my fact number 2. Interesting, the last recorded videos that Paul made of his father Alec was on the day of the murder, about 2 hours before the murder took place. And it was one where they were discussing a tree that was planted and sunflowers that were evidently accidentally sprayed with weed killer, and they died. It's just one of those quinky dinks I thought I'd note, because Saturn is associated with agriculture. Now, clue number 1 here is that I am identifying Saturn as the driver of Alec and his deeds. Oops. Okay, so Saturn is not home, but is anyone else there? Well, here's the house, and it's not empty. We have someone visiting. Yes, it's Pluto the sharpshooter, the one with a surgeon's precision, a secret operative, a hidden force ready to pounce. It works behind the scenes and is a formidable spirit. This is the kind of energy that makes your skin crawl and makes you want to get the heck out of here and go as far away as possible. His stare pierces you. This is the cleaner, the one who takes care of things, removes obstacles, the executioner, the transformer. You know, that's what they call him. He's transformative. Well, you know, the thing to keep in mind is that to transform anything requires deconstructing it, tearing it apart, purging it, annihilating, and burying any remaining evidence under the ground. So here these two ominous energies team up to execute their diabolical plans. Fact number 3. Saturn and Pluto near each other and poorly aspected represent death in a chart. Remember I mentioned aspects are relationships, and the reason I say they're poorly aspected is because Pluto here is having an almost double opposition to the planet Mars. And Mars is a warrior, Pluto is a killer. It's an ugly battle, and someone's going to lose. And Saturn here is squaring the planet Uranus, which we're going to address in a meeting with. So these are probably the most malefic planets, and they're not in good aspect to one another. In fact, they're in really bad aspect. So that means that the worst of these planets are reflected here in this chart. And that's not going to be pretty. Because Saturn and Pluto near each other and poorly aspected always represent death in a chart. And after all, this chart does represent 2 murders. And here before us, we find the aftermath of these 2 animations of evil. Now, here's a trigger warning. Anyone who is sensitive to the details often involved in a murder, the mention of, blood or gore or methods of destroying life, if those details trigger you, then I would say you should not listen to this part, at least. It could be very triggering, but I'm going to read the chart as it is represented. So here we are. We're observing the aftermath of these 2 animations of evil. And what we find is really disturbing. It is a slaughter in the kennels that occurred before the dogs, if only the dogs could talk. It was near the game cleaning room, and that's an area where slaughtered animals are cleaned. Their insides are removed, and they are quartered for consumption. So there is biological material, blood, and other biological material that is splattered everywhere. And that's kind of a common occurrence in this particular space. So the space in its own has a certain stench, a smell of death, a smell of blood, a putridish smell, even though it is often rinsed off with the water hose so that all that matter is removed. Now, I didn't really express this the way that I should have, but I will in the next few sentences. But that kind of environment is a very Plutonian effect. Pluto is very comfortable, like I said, with the deconstructing of life and with the decomposition that occurs in death. So, in mythology, the archetype associated with Pluto is Hades, and he's the one who takes what he wants and holds the key to the gates of hell. Are you freaking out yet? Well, this promises an extremely gory, bloody, messy, merciless, explosive, execution-style massacre. Don't touch anything and get the hell out of here would be my first instinct. Fact number 5. The crime scene was bloody, gory, messy, merciless, and here it comes, trigger warning, with one victim's biological material that is normally contained in their skull splattered on ceilings and walls, and the other was de-lifed execution style with 2 shots to the back of the head while already wounded and on the ground. Clue number 2. From this first place, I would extrapolate that there are at least 2 individuals involved in this crime, and they were present at the time it occurred. One was an instigator and the one who devised the crime, and I would attribute that role to Saturn, whose goal was to stage this to look like a professional hit. The other was more involved in initiating the actual pulling of the trigger and carrying out the execution. I attribute that role to Pluto. Now, did both Pluto and Saturn pull the triggers? Since we know that 2 different weapons were involved, a 12-gauge shotgun and an AR-15 style rifle. I don't know that yet. I may not know that at all. We have to go through the entire chart. We're not there yet. But we do know that Pluto was involved in a relationship that's called a trine, which is a nice, easy, non-threatening type of a relationship. And it was exuding that energy to the moon. Now, I would interpret that as it is trying to influence the moon to trust and comply with its darkness. Now, here's clue number 3. Was this a reference or an indication in the chart of when Alec was asking Maggie to come to Moselle instead of going to Edisto? Because she originally wanted to go back to Edisto, which was at the beach house where she preferred to stay, because she didn't like Moselle because of the yellow flies, which evidently were biters. But Pluto is also locked in a really nasty, almost double opposition, remember, with Mars. Now, clue number 4. I happen to know Paul was an Aries and Mars rules Aries. So I read this as Pluto was really upset and angry at Paul. Now, I have not yet identified Pluto. Let's see if the chart will take us there with enough clues. The next thing we're going to look at is at the relationship and ownership these 2 planets are involved in. So first we follow the rhythm of Saturn. Where is he? We already know he went to the 2nd house. Who owns that place? Saturn does, but in partnership with another planet, Uranus. Now, Uranus doesn't necessarily just represent one individual. Uranus, and with its association with Aquarius, usually represents a group. And the law firm is a group. Which leads me to ask, could this be the law firm? Because earlier that day, he was confronted about that missing $750,000 by the firm's CFO. Could that be what the chart is referring to here? I don't know. We'll have to find out what this house represents. So let's go there. What does that 2nd house represent? Well, it shows the manner of attaining wealth, resources, material comforts, and all things of a financial matter. Now, when afflicted, it shows losses in these things. And yes, the house is very afflicted. Saturn is involved in a very bad square aspect to Uranus. So it's the partners or the group against Alec, or Alec against the group. It's that kind of... So when afflicted, it shows that there's losses in these things. And so when he was confronted with that $750,000, I think he realized his gig was up. Now, what took place in this first house is linked to the affairs of the second house. It is also linked to the affairs of the fifth house, particularly the father's financial status and the assets of the father. Now, that came directly out of this book that I have been following, and it is a wonderful book on approach to house interpretation based on ancient. Let's see, is this based on ancient Renaissance astrology with the likes of Lilly and Ptolemy, and it's written by Deborah Holding, and she has done an excellent job of clarifying a lot of questions I had about the differences between the houses and the zodiac signs. So that's where that comes from, that association. Now, that's an upa, because let's read that again. When afflicted, it shows losses in these things. When this house is afflicted, it shows losses in all things pertaining to it, which is all financial. And what took place in this first house is linked to the affairs of this house, but it also links to the affairs of the fifth house, particularly the father's financial status. See? So Alex's losses links to here too. And it involves the assistance of the father. So there's my next upa, which means Alex had assistance. He had help. Alec had help, Houston. Now, it also weaves a connection to the eighth house. And the eighth house is where it links to the wealth of the partner. So here it comes. So here is where the connection comes to all of this financial debacle that affects his financial status and his standing with the group. Now he's linking back to his partner's assets, because she has wealth of her own. She came from a wealthy family, and he knew he had access to that. Plus, remember, Moselle by this time was already deeded to her, and I haven't been able to verify, but I believe Edistil, the beach house, was also deeded to her, and I think there was talk about it being put up for sale, and I'm not sure if she was all happy about that. But according to this, it links to the wealth of the partner and the enemy's resources and supporters. Now, this kind of infers that either Alec was viewing Maggie on the opposite team as the enemy, or his supporters, which I don't know who those are. I don't know if that is the nefarious characters that he does deals with, or if those were the family members involved in the law group that were turning against him. But this is the place where those are connected. This house is where it links to the wealth of the partner and the enemy's resources and supporters. So he ran out of places he could go to get money. And I believe this is an upa, because did Maggie say no to him? Because here what he sees as his movable possessions and assets, anything that she owns, he sees as belonging to him. And, some states, I think the law looks at it like that. I don't know what South Carolina law looks at, but in some states, I know that even some institutions like the IRS or bankruptcy courts or whatnot, they look at the marriage as a economic unit. So I don't know if that pertains here or not. But it shows this house here shows his and Maggie's real estate and his intent to tie them in with what he was proposing over here. So maybe what he was saying is, Maggie, we're going to sell this, we're going to mortgage that, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and I'm going to take the money. And I don't know what stories he might have been weaving for her, and she might have said, no, we're not doing that, I've had enough. But it shows his and Maggie's real estate and his intent to tie them in with what he was proposing. Ha! Alec is wheeling and dealing, trying to move money around, hide money and assets, because remember, there was also this impending financial discovery taking place, which triggered this whole discovery by the law firm that $750,000 had been stolen, and that unraveled the whole house of cards, because then they started a deeper audit and realized he'd been stealing from them for a decade or more. So, as this astrological aspect shows, that he was trying very hard to manipulate his partner's wealth so he can cover his, donkey. And maybe she just wasn't having it. Maybe he was trying to access more than the properties. Maybe he was trying to access her own personal family wealth from her side of the family. I don't know. But he was trying to borrow, steal, and manipulate. Now, what relationship influences are taking place here? Well, Alec has gone to visit the property. Alec has gone to visit the property he co-owns or has an interest in with a group, which is represented by Uranus. And Uranus is having a conjunction aspect, that is over here, with the moon. And what that means is, this is the father's financial status. It's being affected by this joining of forces, this energy. And I don't necessarily believe this is one individual, but I think this might have been a group who was influencing Maggie. And that means that it was influencing her decisions. So when Alec came to her with this great idea of his, she was not receptive to it. And I don't know if anybody in any of this was advising her. I don't know if she had, benefactors in any of the people who were involved with Alec. But someone was now influencing her decisions. Something, some energy, some inspiration popped into her head and was, I guess, having her think twice about going along with Alex's schemes. Saturn, though, is in square aspect to Uranus and the moon. And the moon here represents females, the mother, liquids, the water. And this house is usually a house of pleasure and enjoyment. And Uranus here indicates an accident, which we know. I didn't put it here, but there was a boat accident that injured a female, and necessarily believe this is one individual, but I think this might have been a group who was influencing Maggie. And here is Black Lilith, which shows someone who is taking a stance and is no longer easily controlled. So this planet here, the moon, not only represents the girl that perished in that boat accident in the water, but it represents a change, an influence that has come over Maggie. Now, unfortunate for Maggie, this is squared from the second house. So Alec, and maybe even the group he represents, wasn't having this resistance. And unfortunately for Maggie, and I have not yet identified who or what Uranus might be representing here, but I think I have since I wrote this. I think Uranus represents the law group. So here's clue number 5. I may not be clear on who this is, but I think I am. But I know it is a business partnership involved in real estate loans, mortgages, sale, or the transfer of property for these purposes that is behind what ultimately leads to this crime. And I thought this might be one of Alex's friends, one of the lawyers that's in cahoots with him, or one of the bankers. But no, the more I think about this, I think it's the group. So it's a group representation. So I think it's the entire law group, and it may also be the bankers and the other lawyers who might have participated in some of Alex's cases. So everybody who might have stood a loss here was coming down hard on Alec. Interesting. Now, what does the second house tell us? Let's recap that, because it took us to certain places. It took us to the confrontation concerning the $750,000 missing money. It took us to a boat accident, and the boat accident is what triggered the audit that led to finding the missing money, and it led us to seeing how Alec was wheeling and dealing, trying to move some money and hide assets because he knew there was lawsuits coming from the death of the girl in the boat accident. He was moving things around, trying to hide money and assets, and that was the whole backdrop that triggered the murders. Now, what does the second house tell us? Alec was hustling to cover his dirty Murdaugh donkey and was in a power struggle over the movement, mortgaging, or selling of property. Maggie was influenced by someone or something, and it seems like she took an opposing stance against Alex's demands. So clue number 6, Uranus, the unknown energy working on Maggie's mind, is known to be divisive. It causes separation, and usually in an abrupt manner. And although it releases tensions, it does so in a way that is sudden, shocking, cruel, and violent. I mean, I'm reading what the chart says, but it's all there. In Renaissance astrology, the second house was termed to be a most unfortunate place where sudden tragic events can occur, or in this case, be planned. This is a place said to be weak for the person or event because it is an area where we are unable to effectively control our environment. So one may become the victim of circumstances or the consequences of their past actions. So here's clue number 7. Alex loses control. Basically, he loses his manure over his circumstances. This house denotes the place where tragedy may occur for no apparent reason. Where one normally can shrug things off, they instead implode with the weight of their predicament and become overwhelmed. A psychological breakdown happens at the realization that he is in a situation which is riddled with loss. he experiences alienation and a destructive urge that he cannot turn away from. Very similar to addiction, when you become obsessed with a thought. So feeling powerless was not something Alec could deal with, and he felt powerless here, because that's what that second house shows. And clue number 8, this placement of Saturn in the second, squaring both Uranus and the moon, are a bad omen for Maggie. Fact number 6. Now, after the fact, the uncovering by the prosecution of all the dealings that I just denoted were affected in the area of the second house, and that Alec took part in, this will actually help the prosecution's case. But the question is, will the judge allow the evidence in? Or if he will allow some of it in, and how much? Well, wow, this is heavy. I'm going to end this here and continue in my next video, where I will move away from the second house and into this third place, where we find Jupiter and Neptune, who happen to be the co-owners of this house, and they both happen to be home because they both co-own the sign of Pisces. Now, what are they doing home? What relationships are they nurturing? And how do they link to these murders? We'll go there next. Thank you for watching. Remember to share, comment, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you'll be notified when I post part 3 of the Murdaugh Murders. Bye now.